This is the People Class Podcast, the official podcast of the People Class. Show your support at patreon.com/thepeopleclass. Send us a shout out at the People Class on Twitter, and send us your feedback at thepeopleclass@gmail.com.
This song ain't copyrighted. This song ain't trademarked either. It's a public domain protest song. This song ain't gonna sell. This song where it ain't no hit. It's a finger to the corporate hill. They own the news, so it don't mean shit. I pledge allegiance to Goldman Sachs, undercard and shadow packs, Fox News and a wall of white noise. Confuse the girls and confuse the boys. Hey! Public domain protest song. Sing it free, sing it piss, sing it strong. Root the corporations out of DC. A dirty money, it's American greed. Public domain protest song. Sing it free.
Welcome to Session 3 of the People Class Podcast, and the first in the series covering the history of U.S. labor union struggles. I want to thank you for sticking around, and I hope you end your time with us a little more informed, entertained, and empowered to fulfill your duty as an American to build a better America. Not only for ourselves, but for future generations to come. We here at the People Class Podcast believe that JFK gave us the key to prosperity here in America. I think we overlooked the true meaning behind his famous line during his inaugural speech. When he told us, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." He knew something we did not. He saw that the government of his time, and the future beyond him, quite frankly, was not interested in working for the interests of the American people. He saw the change in the tide. Little did we know that he was empowering us. But we are too distracted with the space race, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the effects of the Red Scare, and rising tensions with Russia, then known as the USSR. The Cold War had Americans in a lot of anxiety. This is not to deify JFK, but it's to make you aware that we had the formula all along. And the government, coupled with private industry, effectively pulled the wool over our eyes. He understood that it was only by a united working class we would achieve such a quality of life. Those words ring as true today as they did over 50 years ago. So, as usual, I like to start the podcast by introducing exactly what it is we do here. So, what is the People Class Podcast? It is a weekly podcast consisting of weekly class sessions, like the one you're listening to right now, and a main show, The Quad. We already have a couple episodes up. Be sure to visit the Patreon page, YouTube, and SoundCloud to take a listen to those conversations. And the main show features guests. We will take times to answer subscriber calls, emails, and chat. And I try to keep the class sessions on more of a structured format than the main show, as the main show is more of a free-flowing conversation on the topic of the week. Now, I want to keep the content available via YouTube uploads, so don't feel pressured, to subscribe to Patreon, but I'd appreciate the support. So, the People Class Podcast, our primary focus is to build your awareness of how powerful you truly are in shaping the American economy. You need to understand that you deserve more as a working class individual in America. And you need to demand that our corrupted system of government make you whole. You need to demand that they return what was stolen from you through 40 years of predatory legislation, fair wages and distribution of wealth, universal basic income, Medicare for all, other social safety nets, etc., etc. We aim to encourage and call our fellow working class Americans to action, to get active, to organize, and start a nationally, federally recognized union of the most diverse, driven, creative individuals this country has to offer. The American working class citizen. So let's do a dive into the history of labor unions in the United States. I would kind of place a subtitle or almost rebrand this here as a layman's history of U.S. labor union struggles, as I would like to once again stress that I am in no way, shape, or form a historian or an expert in this field in any way. I am just another, aka working class Joe, who still has to punch into a time clock on a daily basis. And I have 3 kids, and I want them to live a better life than I did and my mom did. And I would like to also benefit from that prosperous life as well. So I became active. And this is my way of reaching out to the community to see what we can do to empower ourselves. Because as you can see now, the government is definitely interested in stuff in their pockets and filling their bank accounts. As you will come to see in this look back, the labor union struggles that we are enduring today are as old as the birth of the nation, and quite honestly, it goes back before. And it is a struggle as old as time, essentially. As long as one civilization has had more advanced technology, quasi-organically in our human system, that advanced civilization tends throughout history to target less developed nations in often hostile and violent ways. This is just the way we have worked over the history, okay? And since grade school, the facts are in the history books. No one is a stranger to the name Attila the Hun, for example. And if you are, I encourage you to hop on Google and do a quick search on him. I am such a fan of research, and I think you will find that it is very fulfilling, and you may find some information that are jewels or other takeaways that at the moment we're not focused on, but you may carry with you for your lifetime. So while most cultures pride themselves on hospitality, historically, the Anglo influence in the history of the expansion of the Western developed world often left behind a trail of blood-soaked soil, bodies disposed of if viewed as having no value. A nation's wealth and resources are often occupied by invading forces, leaving the people economically and ecologically ravished. The most notable example of this is the results of modern-day Africa. The British imperialists occupied most of the southern nation, the continent, as Africa is a conglomerate of many nations. And wherever deemed fit to support global trade, expansion, and profit, the continent is now a wasteland. local African economic growth and industrialization stifled by the fact that invading nations placed their flag on precious mines and lavish oases, leaving the natives the only option of servitude for a cause they will not benefit from. As their capacity to oppose their oppressors often and take back their native resources as blocked behind corporate influence legislation and military presence. There are many examples that highlight the need to protect the common interests of the worker. Let's explore the bedrock, the cornerstone, nay, the foundation of modern-day capitalism: free labor. So you may notice that we are still fighting for fair treatment and rights as workers. You may notice you have to take on more jobs to meet the bare necessities that you and your family need to survive. Some of you may be wondering when you will benefit from your white privilege, because these liberals have no idea that you are struggling just as much as them, even though you're white. My friends, I would like to assure you today that you are not crazy. You have been gaslighted. The working class has been since before the birth of the nation that stands today, since 1776, and even after 1865, and we're talking about the official abolishment of slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, and we will cover that in a little more detail in the next session. So before we jump into this turbulent history, I'd like to present to you the answer to the objection. The system is too big. Why bother? What have we achieved so far? Once again, my fellow working class Americans, this is not a new struggle. Let's highlight the accomplishments of the labor unions and labor movements throughout American history. We've achieved to abolish child labor. No longer are children in their double-digit years required to go and endanger their lives and mangle their bodies in the machinery of industry. Okay, that was a thing. Understand, and I need to highlight this, that men and women had to die so that children were not forced into industry labor servitude. We achieved the right to an 8-hour workday. Once again, I'm going to circle back, and you've often heard the you've often heard the saying that people died so that you can work an 8-hour day. Once again, this is true, and we will get into the background and the history of why this is. We achieved the right to health care benefits. Now, the question of the ethics or the morality behind healthcare being locked behind an employment gate is a conversation that needs to be had. And in some sense, it is being addressed and brought to the forefront of the political arena due to some of the champions like Bernie Sanders. However you feel about him at the moment, it is important to highlight that as a win or a very big step. We achieved aid to injured workers in the form of workers' comp and state labor boards. And I did promise in previous sessions that I would share my anecdote of my experience of using this great tool, worker protection tool called state labor boards. If the employer you're working for are not following legal mandates to, say, maintain their equipment, for example, or at least in my case, this is the basis of my claim against them. If it weren't for that, understand how many more people out there in the world would not have any recourse for injuring themselves or accidental death due to fulfilling their duties to an employer. Okay, so this is very huge. So I'll go ahead and I'll do a sidebar here if you will permit me, and I'll share that anecdote. So after I got out of the Navy in 2008, just as the crash hit in March of 2008, I went to seek further employment. I was selling cars at the time, and I went to seek further employment with the local Walmart up the street. Long story short, in total, I gave them about 5 years of my life. And within that 5 years of my employment with the company, I ended up injuring my back on two separate occasions. Okay. Within 5 years, this is a for back injury. This is not your ideal situation. Okay, you should understand you only have one back, and you want to do everything you can to preserve it. So, my store in particular, and I'm not sure how long they had this issue before I was employed there, but my store in particular had a very hard problem with maintaining their equipment. Their equipment meant to move things with heavy loads, right? So we're talking about pallets of canned goods and pallets of product, period. This is how you move things around in a retail environment. So pallet jacks that, at least for the time I was there, never felt the hands of a maintenance guy. And there were also two electric pallet jacks that were meant to carry the heavier loads. Your pallets of liquids and aluminum mixed with those liquids, etc. So, like I said, in a matter of 5 years, I ended up hurting my back on two separate occasions in which I did seek out workers' compensation and physical therapy. Now, during this whole time, my peers, the overnight freight stockers and backroom team, they would get hurt, but they were often afraid to report their injuries due to, one, a lot of them were actually a lot of undocumented workers who would cross the border, the Tijuana border, into Chula Vista, which is in southern San Diego. And they didn't understand that even with their citizenship status, that they still had worker protections, and that any sort of retaliation against them for using that was illegal. Okay, and I tried to explain this to people, and throughout the years, just everyone was afraid to report these injuries, for whatever reason. And actually, as I just explained, overwhelmingly the fear was of some sort of retaliation from the company. So after the second time I hurt myself, I and I admit, and a little bit out of spite, because out of the hard labor that I gave the company when I went to when I went to apply and interview for management, they felt that I had not given enough to the company. So after the second time, as I explained, I ended up filing a labor board suit with the California State Labor Board. And I prepared in advance for this. I planned this all out, to make sure that all my bases were covered. So every night as I clocked in, I went and I took pictures of the pallet jacks and all the chunks and cracks and crevices in the wheels. All the I took video and picture of all the broken hydraulics and levers and things like that didn't work, the leaking, all the leaking gears and whatnot. And sadly, trying to elicit any sort of, witnessship or backing of this claim. People, once again, they were afraid of retaliation and wished me luck, but opted not to be involved in any way, shape, or form. So I went at it solo. Now, funny thing is, right away, the first thing the Walmart HR did was they attacked my productivity. The funny thing about this attack on my productivity is that throughout the entire 4 and some months that I spent with the organization, each and every single one of my reviews stated that I was performing above expectations. And eventually, I think that evolved to what they call now a role model. So, I was almost, to an extent, the company man, the amount of work that I gave these people. And I received the highest wages in an amount of 3 years in an industry such as that. Every year to consistently be awarded a raise of $1 or more, that says a lot. So they tried to defame me by attacking my productivity and then attendance, and then after that they really didn't have anything else to say. So as the labor suit was open, I had, for other reasons, decided to pursue other endeavors. I went to college full time, but I left Walmart, and I would get calls and calls and text messages from former coworkers at that store. I want to say about 3 months after I left. And they were reporting to me how the store just suddenly, magically got new equipment. So, I felt like a little bit of a thankless hero, but once I heard this news, I did take it upon myself to go and revisit the store again as a customer, and go, say hi to some of my former overnight buddies and tell them that they were welcome. They were welcome because I chose to stand up to this corporation and their neglect of their workers, that for, maybe a few more years they can preserve their bodies while using this equipment, as they struggle to make ends meet, employed with these workers. Okay. So this is not to boast, this is not to brag, but once again, this is to just let you know, as workers in America, American citizens or not, you do have currently, believe it or not, in this crazy world right now in the United States in 2020, you do have some worker protections, some legal worker protections, and if you are diligent and do your homework and put the onus on the corporation that has threatened your safety on the company, right? Then these little successes add up, because once again, you may not be some sort of labor union martyr or hero, but like I said, just for I'm not sure how long it took for the next set of equipment to degrade, and if people continue to get hurt afterwards, or if that store continued to follow the California labor standards. But I know for a time that one person in that community of people did make a difference. So please, 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 I want you to feel empowered to use these tools, okay? These are your weapons. Use them. Put them into practice. Make them viable. Give them reasons to give them reasons to not defund these sorts of sectors in our communities, okay, in our governing bodies. So, ladies and gentlemen, imagine if we all did that on a mass scale. This is essentially what the idea of a union is. This is essentially what the idea of a socialist community is. And I'm taking that to the extreme by saying that, because overall, this is essentially what citizens, working class citizens, who all need the same protections. This is what we should all be doing for each other, is what I'm saying here. Each one of us should be looking out for one another, to the extent that you are willing to stand up and fight big corporate interests for the sake of your colleagues, because they don't feel empowered, because of the fact that they feel like their source of income will be ripped away, because they feel like that they will be defamed in some sort of way, okay? You have this power. If little old me, a poverty class, black adolescent at the time, who grew up in the southern Los Angeles ghetto of Watts, California. If I was able to do that and correct some injustices, you can too. So, going back to the achievements of working class labor unions and labor movements. Aid to retired workers, okay? There was a time where this came in the form of pensions, and unfortunately that's disappearing now, but pensions and Social Security insurance, those are all things that usually people benefit for in their so-called golden years. Once their bodies have been used and they want to try to enjoy the rest of the life that they have ahead of them. And once again, those have been replaced overall with the 401k scam, and SSI is always being attacked. Well, I'm glad you noticed. And sidebar, the current presidential nominee for the Democratic Party, Joe Biden, he has, throughout his entire political career, fought to defund and take away Social Security insurance and Social Security protections. So just consider this. And once again, I raise red flags to my Black and Latin X communities, because overall, we are the ones who are disproportionately affected by legislation taking away such protections. We gain vacation time, albeit most of it has been taken away over the past 20 years, but we gain vacation time. Women were allowed into the workplace, right? They were no longer forced to the confines of their home to serve, essentially serve the patriarch of the household, And, you know, that's a big step in a lot of women gaining their independence. And, you see female CEOs, you see female astronauts and physicists, and you name it. Fortune 500 and et cetera, et cetera. Now, I say that stuff, Fortune 500 and CEO and blah, 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 because in the American paradigm, those are considered big capitalist achievements, almost viewed with more value than, let's say, the cure to polio, right? Right. So we also gained sexual harassment protections for women in the workplace. Now, this is once again something that's still a struggle, but regardless of the fact, we cannot minimize the fact that they are there. We achieved equal opportunity employment despite disability, mental health disorder, sexual orientation or identity, political or religious belief. Some good employers out there actually recognize and respect the sanctity of religious holidays. And quite frankly, I remember the time in which they for sure used to. As stated before, you have noticed that all of these protections have been attacked and reduced, especially since the mid-70s in the U.S. as corporations took their foothold in the influence of our government and our economy. So I hope you enjoy our journey through the history today, but fair warning, there's a lot to unpack. In our first class session on U.S. labor struggles, we're going to cover the topic, why all of the opposition to labor unions and workers' rights in the U.S. What motivates this type of behavior? Why have labor unions and working class movements been such a focal point for the business class if our nation values freedom and equality overall? Those are all good questions. Let me preface our topic of oppression today with the topic of socialism. This is a big, scary four-letter word in the nation leading the global capital market. Credited to individualism and manifest destiny when it comes down to it in modern day U.S. capitalism. Manifest destiny is a 19th century Western ideology and doctrine that the United States is destined by God. It advocates, believed, to expand its dominion and spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. An excuse in hubris if I've ever seen one. And we've seen the destruction left in the path throughout world history. Social superiority and the overall idea of a free market, and that competition within the free market breeds ingenuity and opportunity for the common good. The caveat here is that the fruits of your labor laid bare as proof of the energy and hard work you put into cultivating a prosperous life. This, ladies and gentlemen, is just a smokescreen, as many of you in 2020's United States have come to realize, but I digress. Labor unions and working class movements are opposed to that ethos by nature. Labor unions threaten access to a surplus of wealth, power, and influence. If anyone is on an equal playing ground, labor unions are socialist in nature. So, what is socialism? While there's no universal consensus on an unadulterated definition of socialism, as each culture implements its ideals in different manifestations, often a hybrid of other economic and social systems adopted by a given nation. And I hope that makes sense. So, what is socialism in general? Wikipedia defines socialism as, quote, a political, social, and economic philosophy encompassing a range of economic and social systems, characterized by social ownership of the means of production, this is key, and workers' self-management of enterprises, okay? Social ownership can be public, collective, cooperative, or of equity. Social ownership is the one common element. It aims to circumvent the inefficiencies and crises traditionally associated with capital accumulation and the profit system of capitalism. Like the current coronavirus crisis, the 2008 recession, and 2001's 9/11 terror attacks. So, what have socialists politically done to warrant such attention and opposition? Well, let's explore. Let's see why. I'm going to give you a few key characteristics of socialist movements. Okay. So, one, reasons for opposition, and I'll give you the reason after I list each characteristic here. I'll give you the very reason why it is opposed. Okay. So, follow along. They can range from national to international. Why are they opposed? Power of the masses. They are organized through political parties. Why are they opposed? Power of the masses. They are opposed to party politics. Why are they opposed? Power of the masses. They are sometimes aligned or opposed to trade unions. Unfortunately, this is the self-destructive power of the masses. And they're often formed in developing and industrialized countries. Why are they opposed? Power of the masses. I hope you get the gist by now. So I would like to apologize if you do hear any weird noises happening in the background. My Shih Tzu is snoring away, and I could not get him out of my recording area. And anyway, moving forward. A collection of the populist masses spell the destruction of greedy, overabundant lifestyle the elite business class is so accustomed to. They, the rich, the business class, the oligarchs, Want to prevent solidarity among the working class because the working class demands that the rich pay their fair share of taxes. The working class demand an equal distribution of income and wealth. The working class demand to have a say in the business decisions that ultimately affect their personal work-life balance, and the overall quality of their lives. The working class demands women get paid the same salary as men as they are doing the same labor. The working class demands more vacation time, and so on and so forth. To the business class, these worker demands are a burden. They don't often immediately add to the bottom line with a rapid return on investment in their labor versus the financial resources taken to expand their enterprise. The worker demands often come at a cost to the business class through the implementation of workers' compensation, medical benefits, etc., etc. It's a mystery to anyone why healthcare is tied to employment, other than if a system wanted to deliberately tie the hands of the worker, forcing them to be a quote-unquote productive member of society, forcing them to take on rapidly degrading job security and jobs of rapidly degrading security and quality. Because without the job, they would not have access to life-saving medication like insulin for type 1 diabetics, for example. The business class frowns upon the working class as a necessary evil and a means to achieve their wealth. The business class dehumanizes the working class by referring to them as a human resource. Yes, human is in the title, but the name itself reeks with the stench of what its veneer conceals. Let's replace this term of human resources, or rather let's place you as a working class citizen into a category of human resources. This category or term is called chattel. 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 Sounds a lot like cattle, huh? But only a coincidence. Chattel will make a return visit down the road, but in the meantime, I do want to go ahead and define that term for you. What is chattel? Chattel is an item of tangible, movable, or immovable property. As a human resource, you're merely movable property of the employer to go where they deem fit and to do what they deem fit to maximize profits that you quite honestly never benefit from. Your employer dictates when you're allowed to be at home and when you're required to be at work. Your employer dictates if you can go to a family member's wedding or funeral or graduation in another state. As chattel, your employer applies blackout vacation dates, usually toward the latter quarter of the year, as the relentless onslaught of seasonal tradition has been substituted for a call to participate in holiday sales and the like. As chattel, your employer can reprimand you for being 3 minutes late to your shift, unempathetic that you may be a single mother scrambling to get her children ready for school, or you have to rely on public transportation, or had to replace a flat tire. You get the idea. In the U.S., there is no greater achievement than adding a few more zeros to the end of your bank account balance. A sad commentary on the toxic conditioning of the modern neo-capitalist system, as there is deemed to be no value in any nonprofit-driven motive, those causes are viewed as aloof in the capitalist lens. Back to justification for opposition of working class labor unions and movements by the business class. So, historically, labor unions have ushered in an awareness and an era of social democracy, movements supporting economic and social justice, essentially. This ethos traditionally drove the motivations of the U.S. Democratic Party, a far cry from 2020, when the Democrats have essentially abandoned their post altogether and migrated to the right. On the political spectrum, socialism is far left, with conservatism opposing from the far right. Bear with me as I want you to fully comprehend the importance of these opposing political ethos as a control or contrast, if you will, to the modern Democrat. Then make a decision for yourself if you still believe they hold these ideals close to the breast. Let's define conservatism. Conservatism is a reactionary ethos created to support the private profit motive and oppose the equal distribution of wealth that the socialists deem fair. What are the key contrasting elements of conservatism, you ask? American tradition, nationalism, nostalgia, calls to better times, make America great again, I think things of that nature. Another key element of conservatism are Christian values, which are often boasted as their cornerstone value. That governs most of their political decision making. Okay. Conservatism is pro-business. Anti-labor union, hence the title reactionary. One key element of conservatism is this idea of rugged individualism. The idea that the exercise of one's goals and desires and so value independence and self-reliance and advocate that interests of the individual should achieve precedence over the state or a social group. You saw this with the predatory loans that led to the 2008 crash, which resulted in over 5 million U.S. families essentially losing their homes in favor of corporate bailouts and a profit that increased the wealth of already established billionaires. Okay. Rugged individualism, the idea that the exercise of one's goals and desires and so the value of independence and self-reliance, and advocate that interests of the individual should achieve precedence over the state or a social group. You see this in sitcoms and movies when someone is ridiculed and called a loser for living at his parents' house, despite that being a last resort or because they were a victim of predatory capitalism or it being the best financial option for said individual to position themselves for a more independent future. another key element of conservatism. They are anti-communist. The extreme left of the U.S. political spectrum. We will explore the right wing of the political spectrum in future sessions, but it is important to realize that in the U.S., historically, the government has traditionally sided with the interests of private business. Historically, right-wing leaders, being the ruling majority of the U.S. government branches, have been disproportionately increasing in nature, probably due to the power of lobbying and bribery. That is the unspoken influence of the majority of U.S. legislature, especially since the mid-'70s, which was only solidified by the Reagan administration in the 1980s. So, in our history of U.S. labor union struggles, where do we begin? In the U.S., History.com cites a 1768 strike in New York when a group of journeyman tailors protested wage reduction, a symptom of economic deflation, perhaps. However, Wikipedia cites a 1677 Carmen strike, and Carmen were essentially couriers of the day, in which those Carmen strikers were fired. Talking about opposition here. And a fisherman strike on an island off the coast of Maine, which predates both in recorded history, at least in U.S. colonial recorded history. So overall, there's no universal consensus on how far labor movements date in world history. But one can only imagine they have been around as long as there have existed socioeconomic and workplace hierarchies in our civilizations. So what is a union movement? E.J. Dionne, and bear with me, she has a lot of titles here, and I want to go ahead and give credit to all of them. E.J. Dionne, Washington Post op-ed columnist and senior fellow in governance studies at the Brookings Institution, and professor in foundations of democracy and culture at the McCourt School of Public Policy of Georgetown University, as well as an NPR, MSNBC, and PBS commentator. E.J. Dionne states that a union movement has traditionally espoused a set of values, solidarity being the most important, the sense that each should look out for the interests of all. As you can see, labor unions and movements have been the focal point. Once again, why? They are socialist in nature. That scary 4-letter word again. As I stated earlier, one can argue that as long as there have been socioeconomic and labor-based hierarchies, there has been a need for labor unions and worker protections, as a profit motive is by design hostile towards the least privileged. We will now take an interlude today, and we will revisit the history of U.S. labor struggles in future sessions. We will go ahead and conclude today's class session, And I want to invite you to tune in to our next class session covering the topic of slavery and the 13th Amendment. Okay, so we will cover this series sort of in tandem with modern day slavery, okay, because essentially in all the it's in black and white, folks, slavery was never really abolished here in America, only rebranded. Once again, the Emancipation Proclamation, it did say yes, slavery as the state it was in pre-Civil War was abolished, except if you were receiving criminal punishment. So this is key. Okay, this is key to the 13th Amendment, maintaining the cornerstone of labor, okay, in the U.S. and private industry. So we will go ahead and cover that in our next session. Please be sure to tune in. And I want to thank you for listening into today's session. So I'm going to ask you to do what you can, spread the word, and let's inform and educate our peers out there on our retail floors, out there in our fast food kitchens, out there in our cubicles. Okay. Out there in the high rise, connected to a harness with the hammer in your hand. Go ahead and share this with your friends, okay? As we all want nothing here at the People Class Podcast but to help you achieve a better quality of life, because essentially we're all in this together. So go ahead and give us a follow on Patreon if you believe in the work we're doing here. And once again, just it's imperative that you share this information. If you cannot or will not subscribe to Patreon, I invite you to our YouTube channel and to our SoundCloud. The work we do here, I want to make sure that that information is available to everyone for free as well. Okay. So once again, if you truly believe in what we're doing here, I do trust that you will visit us on Patreon and subscribe. And if you can't, overall, just please feel empowered to take action and take control of your lives. And you can resist the corporate interests, and you can resist them taking more and more of your freedoms away from you. Okay, so. I bid you all a good day. Thank you for tuning in to another session of the People Class Podcast, the official podcast of the People Class. I hope you found the information shared in today's session enlightening, or at the very least, raise some questions. I extend an invitation to join us for more weekly sessions. And remember, our work does not stop here. Get active, organize, and take control over your destiny as an American working class person. Class dismissed. Support the unions and long live Wisconsin. It's not the left, it's not the right. It's up and down, and that's the fight. It's a world of loopholes.